you don't mind, please? I got you over there.
Delegate going up.
All right, for the invocation.
Let's pray. Heavenly Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come together. I thank you for this council and those that are willing to serve. Just be within the night as they make decisions that will make Cheraw a better place to live and work. Thank you for everybody else who showed up. Help us all work together and just do our best and forgive us when we fail to live according to your word. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. We would like to welcome each and every one of you here tonight. Please come again. We have a council meeting every second Tuesday of each month. Council, you have a copy of January 2022 financial report. Council, do you approve? Do you have any questions?
You want to move the minutes?
Yeah.
I'll move the minutes, please.
Second. Hear none. Is there a motion that we accept the 2022 financial report? Second. Motion carried out. Council, you have a copy of the activity report, which in your package you can read on your own. Now we will have comments and presentation of the town's annual audit from Bill Hancock of Bridgeton Group.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to the town for allowing us to serve as your independent auditors again this year. As in previous years, we've been welcomed. When we've asked for information, we've been provided it. When we've asked for clarification, it's been given. Each of you should have a bound audit report. Town Cherow's information on it. It's got a circular binder on the side. I'm going to be referencing that. There are page numbers at the bottom of each page. I'm going to be referencing those page numbers. I'm going to be jumping around quite a bit, so I'll try to give you a page number, give you a minute to catch up while I'm adding commentary in the meantime. The first thing we're going to look at in this report is on page 2. The most important thing that you want under an audit engagement is you want an opinion from your independent auditors on whether or not your financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. Meaning that the users of these financial statements can rely on the numbers, balances, and transactions reported herein to make decisions on whether or not to do business with the town. As you can read in the top paragraph on page 2, we feel like that your financial statements as presented can be relied upon for these purposes. English, that means you got a clean opinion, also known as an unmodified opinion, formerly known as an unqualified opinion. Okay? We feel like the books as presented is an accurate representation of the town's financial position and operations. Next, I'd like to direct your attention to page 56. I told you I'd be jumping around a little bit. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the second to the last page of the entire report. I believe that's right. Yes. This is also a letter from us, the auditors, to you, the town, rendering other opinions. And in this particular part, we separated it into two pieces. One, we give you an opinion on what we think of your internal control system for financial reporting. And two, we give you our opinion on what we discovered during the testing process of whether or not the town is in compliance with requirements upon it with other governments, counterparties to contracts, and grantors. First of all, let's talk about internal controls. A, there is no internal control system that's perfect because internal control systems are run by human beings and we all make mistakes. B, our engagement was not specifically designed to poke holes in your internal control system. We did not walk into town hall with an attitude of gotcha. We're going to find out what you're doing wrong, or we're going to pick at you for the mistakes you made. Most importantly, over the course of our work, when we were confirming balances and testing systems, we didn't find any weaknesses in your internal control system that we felt like could be changed. In other words, anything we thought could be an improvement did not have the benefit outweighing whatever costs it would be incurred to make those improvements. Okay? So while no internal control system is perfect, we feel like the town of Cheraw is serving it well and don't recommend any changes at this time. All right. The last page of the report is on page 57. This is when we talk about compliance and other matters. The town of Cheraw is required to remain in compliance with several things. An example of one of the most important things that you must remain in compliance with are things like payroll tax deposits. Every payday, the town withholds taxes from your employees. It applies certain matching amounts, and then it's required to remit it to the U.S. Treasury and the South Carolina Department of Revenue in the proper amount and the adequate time it's allowed to do it. Again, our engagement was not designed specifically to find mistakes in this area, but over the course of our work, we did not discover any instances where this was done improperly. What else are we required to be in compliance with? Well, we're also withholding things like health insurance premiums and retirement amounts from our employees. And some of those things have to have matching amounts added to by the town and then sent into the different state agencies that administer these programs. We didn't find any instances where the town of Cheraw was derelict in withholding these amounts, calculating them improperly, or not sending them in on a timely basis. Another area of compliance this is very important that you would hear about if you were not in compliance with is your municipal court system. We're going to get to a little bit of this in a minute, but over 50% of every ticket that your police department writes, if a conviction is made by forfeiture of bond or guilty verdict rendered by a judge, more than 50% of that goes to the state. Now it's chopped up into 40 or 50 different categories depending on what the offense is, but we found that through time updates of your municipal court software and supervision and review of the system as it occurs, we found no instances where that process had any errors, and you did remain in compliance with what you were supposed to do in adjudicating criminal offenses and then passing along the state's portion to it in a timely basis. And we talked about, just a second ago, about how over 50% of every police ticket that's written goes to the state. Let's look at page 55. Two years ago, the reporting requirements changed format. And I'm glad they did. Because I believe on page 55, this gives you, the governing body, a very clear vision of what happens when a police ticket is written. You can see at the top of the page, there was a total of roughly $80,000 of police tickets that were written last year. And of that $80,000, $44,000 of it roughly went to the state. That means that the town got to keep roughly $35,000 worth of police tickets that were written. One of the focuses of the state is the victim assistance portion of all these tickets that are written. There are surcharges and there are assessments that are assigned to each different kind of offense in different amounts. Those have to be accounted for separately, accumulated, and are very restricted on how they may be used. You can see in the bottom third of the page where you had a carry forward amount from the year before, and then you applied amounts to be used during the current year's Victims Advocate Program that you have here in the town. The surplus remaining at the end of the year will be used to fund in part next year's Victims Advocate activities. Stop right here for any questions. This is something a little new. Don't know if you've seen it before. I believe this is the first time I've probably gone into it in detail with you. So, any questions on the Victims Assistance Schedule on page 55? Hearing none. I'm going to skip around again on you like I told you I would. We're going to go to page. Go on, iPad, we'll look in here. Let's go to page 19, please. Page 19 is where we examine what we budgeted the prior year for revenue and for expenditures. Now, budgeting for revenue can be a little perilous any year because all you're doing is guessing how much revenue you're going to have. Well, the budget for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. A lot of that work was done February, March, and April of 2020. And at that point in time, to remind you, the world was turned upside down. There was no way you folks could have predicted with any certain level of accuracy compared to any other year what kind of revenues you would have. And certain things would have pretty big swings. For instance, we wouldn't have known that property taxes revenue would have gone up more than we expected. They just did. One thing we could have predicted is on police fines, we could have predicted that amount would have gone down. Why? Well, during the summer of 2020, the Supreme Court suspended all municipal court activities. If you don't have court, a judge cannot adjudicate a verdict. If a judge can't adjudicate a verdict, he can't find anybody guilty, and therefore they can't be fined, therefore the general fund can't collect. So that makes sense. Likewise, when we look at, in the expenditure section, Public Works, we budgeted a certain amount, but we didn't spend quite what we budgeted. That's because there wasn't as much going on. However, under public safety, in a global pandemic, we're probably going to spend a little bit more. The first thing that comes to mind when it comes to additional expenditures that you could not have expected in March of 2020 was the amount we were going to spend on PPE in fiscal year 2020-21. So we've got some pretty wild swings here. And at first glance, it doesn't look like the budget that we projected came out very accurately. But if we step back and add a little color to it, think about where we were and what the world did to us, I think this makes a little more sense. Okay, at the end of the day, on a $7.2 million spending budget, at the end of the day this past year, we've had a little over $1 million surplus. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, it's not a bad thing when you have a surplus when you've had deficit in previous years. It's not a bad thing to have a surplus when you very well could have deficits in future years. The important thing to remember is what you want your fund balance to be. You've got a general fund balance at the end of the year about $4.6 million, which means those are the resources you have on hand starting your new year. As you can see, that's far less than a year's worth of operations. Best practice is to have somewhere between 90 days to 120 days worth of fund balance going into your operations for the following year. It looks like the town of Cheraw is close, or at least within that range. And the general fund. General fund defined as basically all town activities except for water and sewer activities, which is what we're going to talk about next. Now, the general fund had a good year, we ended up with a surplus. Unfortunately, on page 21, we're not gonna have the same kind of narrative here. As a matter of fact, there's been several years running now where I stood before you and said, your water and sewer system is losing money. You continue to lose money. To the point where it's simply unsustainable. You can see where we took in about $3.5 million worth of revenue. We had an operating loss of about $1 million. This is where this body needs to seriously consider what means or links it needs to go to get this water sewer system to where it will pay for itself. In other words, break even. Short-term grant money won't help. There's not a whole lot of infrastructure we can sell to subsidize this. We didn't get into this situation overnight, and it's not gonna get itself fixed overnight. Again, I'm inviting this body to give some careful, diligent consideration to solving the problem of the continued deficit that your water and sewer is running. That's pretty heavy for me to lay down on you folks this evening. I'll be happy to have questions or go into details that I can come up with right now about where you are, how you got here, and maybe how to get to where you want to go. Here are no questions on that topic. Things that we've covered in the past that I'll be happy to go over with again if you folks want to hear about it. We have an unfunded pension liability. I think we've talked about that every year for the past 3 years. I'll be happy to go into that again if you want. Some town councils are tired of me explaining it to them because the rules don't change, the methods don't change, and as long as you make your contributions, there's nothing else you can do about it. But I'm here at your pleasure, so if we want to go into that, please say so. If not, we'll find something else to talk about.
Bill, tell us the return on state funds this past year.
The state retirement system as of June 30th, 2021 for the year had a 28% return on investment. One of the better years we've had in history. That was because of course, the public equity markets did extremely well during that period of time. And the other investments that the system had also paid off very well. The private equity and the private infrastructure investments really well.
So based on that return and rising rate environment, our liabilities should be more favorable in this fiscal year.
Well,
Depending on what happens.
Mr. Carpenter, you're right. Okay, let me just color that. The reporting on that lags. In other words, whatever the liability was this year gets reflected in your next year's. So when I'm sitting here before you next year, we should see a decrease in the unfunded liability, and therefore the town's share of that should go down. Again, I want to emphasize, there's nothing the town can do about it. If you had the cash to pay off whatever your liability was, they would not accept it. It's not legal here. It's an accounting / reporting item that we really can't do anything about. But on a positive note, if the funding level reaches a certain point, the annual 1% increase on the match will reverse. Okay, it's eventually going to get to 18.41%. If the funding level reaches 85%, that will go from 18.41 back down to 17.41, and therefore 1% of payroll will be, I guess, not absorbed or not being required, won't be required to be budgeted. So the results of this are positive, but they're deferred.
What is the unfunded liability for the state? It used to be around 20 billion. Is that
It's
coming
around
down?
25 billion at last report. Any other questions about the retirement system? Any other questions about next year in? This is y'all's chance to hit the auditor with whatever you got.
Bill, going back to water and sewer, our only options, unfortunately, we have some of the lowest rates in the state. It's gonna be through higher revenues to take care of the operating loss.
The problem didn't happen overnight. And when you have a loss, you either increase revenues or your combination of increased revenues and decreased expenses. Your management knows whether or not you can wring any more efficiency out of the costs of this thing to maintain this. I haven't heard, and I haven't seen any evidence that there's been any money wasted. So based on that, I don't see where there's a whole lot of opportunity for cost reductions. And so when you rule that out, top line growth is what you're left with. Unfortunately, that's painful.
And unfortunately, we've got aging facilities that require significant outlays to
We need a new
maintain.
treatment facility. It's gonna cost us somewhere between 30 and 40 million dollars.
It's not good news to you, but you're not unlike a lot of small towns, especially in rural areas in South Carolina. That's not good news to you, but you're not alone if that makes you feel better. When you compare your water sewer rates to your peers, meaning other municipalities with your similar population and similar proximities to metropolitan areas, you need to compare yourself to them and judge fairness as to whether are your rates significantly lower or significantly higher. If your rate is significantly lower, you need to ask yourself why. If your rate is significantly higher, you also need to ask yourself why we're charging so much more. And then there's a decision tree that you fall down the road for that. A professional rate consultant, which I believe you all have engaged,
We did.
is helping you with that. So I think this body is seeking counsel it needs. And you're gonna have information in front of you to make decisions. And then at that point in time, is where the rubber will hit the road, so to speak. Any more questions from the council? Hearing none, again, I would like to thank the council for allowing us to serve as your independent auditors. If you all have questions that come up after I leave, both Mike and Tina are very well rehearsed on how to reach me and my staff. They never seem to have any trouble doing it. Please let them know if you want some information from us, we'll promptly reply. And if there's nothing else, I'd graciously ask to be excused.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you all again.
Bill, thank you.
At this time, we will have comments from Ms. Margaret Sanders of 82 Campbell Road regarding the property adjacent to her house. Ms. Margaret Sanders.
Don't think she's here.
Next, we will have comments from Mr. Al Bay regarding the new hotel and ARP funds.
He didn't want, he refused to speak to it.
In your packet, council, you have the activity report. We're down now to the citizens' comments. Is there anybody here that'd like to come forward to council for comments?
Yeah.
Come forward, please.
I'm Melvin Wilkerson, 601 Robin Hood Drive here in Fair City of Cheraw. I've been reading in the papers and other outlets that Chief Keith Thomas is retired. Have you changed your mind, sir? Well, if that be the case, I would like to thank you for your service to the community. I'd like to thank you for what you've done for our section of town, as well as assisting Karen and I at our business downtown. You've gone far beyond the call of duty and what you are assigned to do as far as we're concerned. And I'd like to thank you, commend you for your service to this town. Also to the council, if he changes his mind, please bring him back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
At this time, we'll take a motion, to adjourn. If not, see not, hear not, will somebody, second their motion, please? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.